candles arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my mother's shopping days, had been since I was 9 years old, and she first trusted me to stay home alone while she drove the station wagon to the warehouse district. She'd return with bulk flour, canned tomatoes, powdered milk, the architecture of a woman who understood scarcity the way most people understand gravity, as something that simply was. My mother, Lenore Velde, grew up in a country that no longer exists, in a house with rolling blackouts and a father who kept a jar of rendered fat by the stove, in case the gas line failed again. She carried that house inside her the way some people carry religion, quietly, completely, without apology. But the candles were different. She'd bought candles before, of course. A sleeve of white tapers for the dining table. A squat beeswax pillar she burned on Christmas Eve. Functional purchases. Sensible. Nothing about Lenore Velde was decorative. So when I pulled into the driveway that Tuesday afternoon and saw 17 plastic totes stacked on the front porch, I assumed she'd finally made good on her threat to reorganize the basement. I'd driven down from the city for my monthly visit, one overnight, 2 meals, a walk around the block if her knees allowed it. I was 31 years old, and I still drove 90 minutes each way to eat her cabbage soup and pretend the silence between us was comfortable. I carried the first tote inside. It was heavier than I expected. "Don't drop them," she said from the kitchen. Not hello, not how was the drive. Don't drop them. I set the tote on the hallway floor and pried the lid. Candles, hundreds of them. Tapers, pillars, votives, tea lights in foil cups, long utility candles in cellophane sleeves. Some beeswax, some paraffin, some soy. No uniformity of color or brand. She hadn't ordered these from a catalog. She'd cleaned out a store, maybe 2. "Mom, the rest are in the car." "Mom, what is this?" She appeared in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on the blue towel she'd owned longer than she'd owned me. Lenore Velde was 67, 5'2". Her hair was silver white and cut short against her skull, practical as a welding cap. Her eyes were the color of creek stones, and they did not invite questions. "The power will go out," she said. "When?" "Soon enough." That was the entire conversation. I carried in the remaining totes, 14 more, and stacked them in the basement, according to her instructions. Beeswax on the left wall, paraffin center, soy and tea lights near the stairs. She'd already cleared the shelves. She'd already made room. I didn't ask again. Lenore didn't deal in predictions. She dealt in preparations. If she said the power would go, it meant she'd seen something, read something, felt something shift in whatever instrument panel she kept behind those creek stone eyes. I'd learned by 12 that arguing with her preparations was like arguing with a woman who packs an umbrella on a cloudless day. You feel foolish until you don't. That night, we ate cabbage soup. She'd added smoked sausage this time, which meant she was in a generous mood, or she wanted me to stay an extra night. I stayed. In the morning, she handed me a canvas bag. "For your apartment," she said. Inside were 48 utility candles, a box of Strike Anywhere matches, and a handwritten note on lined paper. The note said, "Top shelf of your hall closet, not the kitchen drawer, the hall closet. Keep the matches in a jar with rice to keep them dry." "Mom, I have electricity." "You have electricity today." I drove home. I put the candles on the top shelf of my hall closet. I put the matches in a jar with rice. I did it because Lenore asked, and because refusing Lenore was an exercise in eventual surrender. 9 days later, the power went out. Not in my apartment building, not on my block. Across the city, across the county, across, as I'd learn later, most of the eastern seaboard, and substantial portions of the interior grid. The news, in the 18 minutes of broadcast that remained, called it cascading infrastructure failure. They were technically correct. Infrastructure did fail. It failed because the people who maintained it were dying, and the people who were dying were not staying dead. I was standing in my kitchen when it happened. 6:14 in the evening, November, already dark outside. The overhead light clicked off, the refrigerator shuddered silent, and the hum I'd never noticed, the sound of civilization keeping its promises, just stopped. I stood in the dark and thought of my mother. Then I walked to the hall closet and reached for the top shelf. The candles were exactly where I'd put them. The matches were dry. I lit the first one at the kitchen counter, and the flame was so small, so ordinary, that for a moment the blackout felt like weather. A storm had knocked a line down. A transformer had blown. Something fixable. Something with a crew already dispatched, a truck already rolling with its amber lights turning in the dark. Then the screaming started. Not close. 3 blocks east, maybe 4. A woman's voice first, high and ragged, the kind of sound that doesn't come from surprise, but from recognition, from seeing something she'd been afraid of, and knowing it was exactly as bad as the fear. Then more voices, overlapping, directionless. And beneath them, something I didn't have a word for yet. A moan that wasn't pain. A vocalization without language, without breath control, without the self-consciousness that separates a human sound from an animal one. I blew out the candle. I didn't decide to. My hand moved and the kitchen went black, and I stood there with smoke curling past my face, listening. My phone was dead. Not out of battery dead. Whatever killed the grid had taken the cell towers or the switching stations, or both. The landline in my apartment was decorative, connected to nothing. I had a battery-powered radio in the bedroom closet because Lenore had given me one 3 Christmases ago, and I'd never removed it from the box. I found it by touch, inserted the batteries by feel, turned the dial. Static across FM, static across AM. One station, very faint, broadcasting what sounded like a recorded loop, a man's voice reading coordinates, and the phrase, "Do not approach populated centers." The recording had a hitch in it, a mechanical stutter every 90 seconds. No one was monitoring the broadcast. No one was coming on air to explain. I sat on the bedroom floor with the radio in my lap, and the dark around me like water. The screaming outside had stopped. That was worse. I thought about calling my mother, then remembered there was nothing to call with. I thought about driving to her, then thought about the roads between here and there. 40 miles of suburban sprawl, 2 highway interchanges, a bridge over the Caro River. In the dark, with whatever was making those sounds. I thought about the candles. I thought about 17 totes on a porch 9 days ago. And a woman who said soon enough the way other people say good morning. In the dark, I inventoried. Not because I'm the kind of person who inventories. I'm a copy editor for a regional insurance magazine. And the most dangerous thing in my professional life is a split infinitive. But because Lenore's voice was in my head, the way it always was when things got quiet and wrong. What do you have, Duff? Not what do you wish you had. What do you have if I had 48 utility candles, a box of 250 strike anywhere matches in a jar with rice, a case of bottled water I'd bought for a dinner party I never hosted, half a loaf of bread, peanut butter, canned black beans 6, canned tuna 4, a flashlight with batteries of unknown age, the radio, a Swiss Army knife Lenore had put in my Christmas stocking when I was 14. A fire extinguisher under the kitchen sink. Heavy curtains on every window because this was a ground floor apartment and I valued my privacy. I did not have a weapon. I did not have a plan. I did not have information. What I had was my mother's conviction that darkness was coming, and 48 points of light she'd put in my hands because she loved me in the only language she spoke fluently, the language of foresight. I did not light a candle. The screaming had stopped, but the silence that followed was not the silence of resolution. It was the silence of a room holding its breath. Sound, I understood already without being told, was currency now. Every noise spent bought attention from something I could not yet see. I moved the water to the bedroom. I moved the food. I moved the candles and the matches and the knife and the fire extinguisher. I locked the bedroom door. I pushed the dresser against it. I sat on the floor between the bed and the wall, and I listened to the dark for 3 hours without moving. At some point during those hours, someone tried my front door. The knob turned. The deadbolt held. The someone outside pressed weight against the frame. Not frantic, not knocking, just pushing, testing, the way you'd lean into a gate you expected to open. Then nothing. I sat in the dark with my hand on the jar of matches. And I waited for my mother to be wrong about anything, just once. She wasn't. Morning came gray and wrong, not wrong the way a rainy morning is wrong. I mean, the light itself felt provisional, like the sky was participating reluctantly. I peeled back one curtain and looked through the window at the parking lot of my building, and I saw 3 things. A car with both doors open and the interior light dead. A shape on the pavement near the dumpster, motionless, face down, wearing a postal uniform. And Mrs. Kessler from 2C standing beside the mailbox in her housecoat, swaying like a metronome with no clock to serve. Mrs. Kessler was 74. She baked cornbread for new tenants and kept a porcelain cat in her kitchen window. She was standing with her arms at her sides and her head tilted 3 degrees off-center, and even from 40 feet through a dirty pane, I could see that her eyes were wrong. Not closed, not open in the way eyes open when they're looking at something. Open the way a door is open when no one is home. I stepped back from the curtain. I didn't need the radio to know what had happened. The sound from last night, the pushing on my door, Mrs. Kessler's eyes, these were not separate events. They were the same event. And the event had a single vocabulary. And the vocabulary was simple. The world you knew has ended, and the dead are walking inside the next one. I sat on the bed, and I was afraid. Not the sharp fear of something jumping at you, the slow fear, the basement fear, the fear that sits on your chest and makes you do arithmetic. How long can I stay here? How far is my mother's house? How many of them are between me and her? The arithmetic was terrible. I ate 2 tablespoons of peanut butter and drank half a bottle of water. And I tried to think the way Lenore would think. Lenore wouldn't sit. Lenore wouldn't count cans. Lenore would already be moving, because Lenore understood something I was only beginning to learn. A locked room is a coffin with better furniture. But Lenore also wouldn't be stupid. She wouldn't walk into a parking lot with Mrs. Kessler swaying beside the mailbox. She'd watch first. She'd count. She'd wait for the pattern. So I watched. Mrs. Kessler stood for 40 minutes without moving. Then something happened, 3 streets over, a car alarm. Dying batteries giving one last electronic sob, and her head turned toward it with a smoothness that made my stomach fold. Not the way a person turns toward a sound, the way a satellite dish tracks a signal. She walked toward it, not fast, not slow. The pace of someone crossing a parking lot to check their mail. The pace of someone with no hurry and no destination beyond the next sound. When she cleared the lot, I counted to 300. 5 minutes. Nothing else moved. I filled my backpack. Water, 4 bottles. Peanut butter, the bread, 3 cans of beans. The Swiss Army knife. Matches in the jar. 12 candles, not all of them. Because I might need to come back. Because this room might still be a room when other rooms were not. The flashlight. Lenore's radio. I left 8 cans, 36 candles, and a note on the counter that said, Dove Velde, Apartment 1D. Heading south to Lenore Velde, 410 Harker Road, Calvary Hill. If you find this and need the food, take it. I don't know why I wrote the note. Optimism, maybe. Or Lenore's voice again. You survive by being the kind of person other people want to survive with. The hallway was dark. My building had no windows in its corridors. A design choice I'd once complained about for aesthetic reasons, and now hated for reasons that had nothing to do with aesthetics. I moved by touch, left hand on the wall, feet testing each step before committing weight. The front entrance was a glass door with a push bar. Through it, I could see the parking lot, brighter now, empty of standing figures. The postal worker was still face down by the dumpster. I watched for 2 minutes. 3. I pushed the bar and stepped outside. The air smelled like cold metal, and something underneath it, something organic and humid that didn't belong to November. I crossed the lot in 15 seconds, keys in my hand, body low, every footfall placed on the ball of my foot, the way I'd walked as a teenager sneaking back into Lenore's house past midnight. That old skill, born of adolescent mischief, repurposed now for the most serious walk of my life. My car was where I'd left it. I got in, turned the key. Nothing. Dead battery, dead electronics. Whatever had taken the grid had taken the ignition. The car was a shell, a metal shell with good seats and no soul. I sat behind the wheel and did not panic, because Lenore's son does not panic. Lenore's son adapts. South, 40 miles, on foot. I got out of the car, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The streets of Ashworth were wrong in a way I didn't have a vocabulary for, so I'll build one. Populated absence, that's what I'll call it. The buildings were there, the cars were there, the stop signs and mailboxes and porch chairs were there, but the animating principle was gone, sucked out like air from a sealed room. It looked like a city. It sounded like a quarry. I stayed off the main road. Lenore had never explicitly taught me route selection. In an apocalypse, she'd taught me to walk home from school via the quieter streets, to avoid the avenue where the older boys waited outside the convenience store, to trust the alley I knew over the sidewalk I didn't. Same principle, larger application. The residential blocks south of my building were a grid of ranch houses and split levels built in the 1970s, each with a small yard and a chain-link fence and a decorative tree that did nothing useful. I moved through backyards where I could, climbing fences that hadn't been climbed since the children who once played here grew up and moved away. Most of the houses were dark and closed. A few had doors open, not broken, just open, as if someone had walked out and not come back. I saw my first body at the intersection of Millward and Croydon. A man in a flannel shirt, face up on the sidewalk, throat opened. Not surgically, not by a blade, by teeth. The wound was ragged and directional, a tearing rather than a cutting, and around it the blood had pooled and begun to darken in the cold air. His eyes were open, and he was not blinking, and he was not breathing, and he was, for now, still. I gave him 15 feet of clearance and did not look back. 3 blocks further, I heard footsteps. Not the shuffling, single-paced drift of Mrs. Kessler. Actual footsteps, rhythm, pace, purpose. I pressed against the side of a garage and waited. A man came around the corner of Croydon carrying a baseball bat and a gallon jug of water. He was younger than me, mid-20s, wiry, dark-skinned, wearing a chef's coat streaked with something that wasn't food. He saw me before I could decide whether to speak, and he stopped. We looked at each other across 20 feet of dead morning light. "You alive?" he said. Not a question. "Yeah." "Moving south?" "Trying to." He adjusted the bat on his shoulder and studied me the way a cook studies a cut of meat professionally, without sentiment, determining quality. "Phelan," he said. "I'm a line cook at the Devereaux on 9th. Was. There's nothing left of 9th. Dove, copy editor. Heading to my mother's place past Calvary Hill. That's 40 miles. I'm aware." Phelan Osei lowered the bat. "There's a woman and 2 kids in the basement of the Methodist Church on Oxbow, 6 blocks south. I've been running water to them from the laundromat on Firth. The commercial washers had reservoir tanks. She's hurt, not bitten. Fell downstairs in the dark. Broken ankle, I think." "You're running supply routes already?" "I'm a line cook. I prep before service. This is prep." I almost smiled. In a different world, I'd have liked Phelan Osei immediately and without reservation. In this world, I liked him immediately, and with the reservation that liking people was about to become expensive. "How bad is it south?" I asked. "Bad from Oxbow to the old rail bridge. There's a cluster at the Greenvale Shopping Center, 50, 60 of them, milling around the parking lot. They're drawn to the building alarms that are still running on backup generators. Give it 2 days and the batteries die and they'll drift. But right now, that lot is a wall. West around? Residential, quieter. I cut through there this morning, saw 4. They don't move fast unless they hear something close. Keep your breathing even and walk like you're not there." "Walk like you're not there" was the closest anyone had come to an instruction manual. And it was essentially what Lenore had taught me about surviving middle school. "Come to the church," Phelan said. "Meet Lorna. Rest. Move at dusk." I didn't want to stop. Every minute I wasn't walking toward Lenore was a minute during which Lenore was alone in a house full of candles, in a world full of the dead. But Phelan wasn't asking me to rest for my sake. He was telling me there was someone hurt in a basement, and he was running supply routes alone, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who'd already done the arithmetic and found himself short 1 pair of hands. "Show me," I said. The Methodist Church on Oxbow Street was a plain brick building with narrow windows set high in the walls. The kind of architecture that communicates modesty and mild suspicion of natural light. Phelan led me around to the side entrance, a steel fire door propped open with a hymnal, and down a flight of concrete stairs to the fellowship hall. Lorna Cassidy was sitting against the far wall, with her left leg extended on a folded quilt and 2 children asleep on either side of her. She was mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the reddish hair pulled back in a knot that had been tidy 12 hours ago and was now just surviving. Her face, when she looked up at us, did not perform relief. It performed assessment. "Who's this?" she said. "Dove Velde. He's walking south to Calvary Hill." "Walking through all of that?" "My mother is there," I said, as if that explained everything. It did. Lorna studied me for 3 seconds. "The children are Willa and Amos. They're mine. Amos is 7. Willa is 10. They haven't spoken since last night, and I'm not pushing them. If you're staying, keep your voice even and don't ask them questions." "Okay." "I'm a large animal vet tech. I set my own ankle with a splint from the church's first aid kit. It's stable, but I'm not walking 40 miles or 40 feet. Phelan's been keeping us alive since 2 a.m. And I don't know what I owe him, but I know I can't repay it from this floor. Phelan set the water jug beside her and crouched to check the splint. His hands were quick and practiced, not medical, but precise. Kitchen hands. Hands that knew how to work in tight spaces under pressure. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Everyone owes someone something. That's how it works now." I set my pack down and took stock of the basement. The fellowship hall was large, windowless, lit by a single battery lantern Phelan had found in the church office. Folding tables stacked against one wall. A small kitchen with a 2-burner stove, disconnected. A storage closet with cleaning supplies, paper goods, and 6 cases of bottled water left from a church potluck that had, apparently, overordered. Water for weeks. No food beyond what Phelan and I had carried in. Willa, the older child, opened her eyes and looked at me without moving. Her eyes were brown and dry and ancient in a 10-year-old's face. She looked at me the way old paintings look at you, not seeking connection, just recording. "Hi," I said, and then remembered Lorna's instruction and didn't ask a question. Willa closed her eyes. I sat against the opposite wall and ate a piece of bread and tried to think. The route south was blocked at Greenvale. The western detour was passable but added miles and unknowns. Dusk was the recommended departure time, which gave me 8 hours to rest and plan. But resting beside a woman with a broken ankle and 2 silent children in a church basement felt less like strategy and more like complicity. Every hour I sat here was an hour I wasn't walking toward Lenore, and every hour Lenore sat in her house was an hour during which the candles burned shorter. "My mother bought hundreds of candles before this started," I said. I didn't plan to say it. It just came out, the way pressure comes out of a valve. Phelan looked at me from the kitchen doorway where he was sorting supplies. She knew. She always knows. She's from a place where knowing was the only thing between you and a very bad winter. What place? Doesn't exist anymore. She doesn't talk about it. Lorna shifted her weight and winced. My grandmother was like that. She kept 5-gallon buckets of wheat berries in the garage. We made fun of her. Then the ice storm hit in 2004, and she was the only person on the street with food that didn't need a refrigerator. "People laugh at the ones who see it coming," Phelan said. "Then they knock on their doors." He said it without bitterness, but I heard the edge underneath. Phelan Osei had already been knocked on. Someone had already come to his door. And someone, I suspected, had already been turned away. "I'll leave at dusk," I said. "I'll take the western route. If you tell me what you need, I can look for it on the way through." "Antibiotics," Lorna said immediately. "For the ankle. If it gets infected in here, I'm done." "There's a veterinary clinic on Prosser Road, west edge of Greenvale," Phelan said. "It'll have amoxicillin, maybe cephalexin. The human pharmacies will be stripped or locked behind electronic security. Vet clinics use physical padlocks." "A vet tech and a line cook," I said. "My mother would approve of both of you." I slept for 4 hours on the fellowship hall floor and woke to a sound I'll never unhear. Not screaming, not moaning, singing. A single voice outside, above us, in the body of the church. A human voice, or something that had been human, producing a sustained, tuneless note that rose and fell without pattern, without breath pauses, without the micro-hesitations that separate a person singing from a sound being made by a throat on automatic. It was coming from the sanctuary above our heads, and it went on for 11 minutes by Phelan's watch. We sat in the dark and listened. Willa opened her eyes and put her hands over Amos's ears. Not her own, her brother's. The gesture undid something in my chest that I'd been holding together with professional distance. The singing stopped. We waited 10 more minutes. Nothing. They do that, Phelan said quietly. The ones that turn slow. The fast ones are gone in minutes. Fever, collapse, they're up and they're blank. But some of them take hours. And during the hours, they do things, remnant things, muscle memory. I watched a woman at the Devereaux pick up a fork and hold it for 40 seconds before she dropped it and went for the dishwasher. The dishwasher who washes dishes? The man who washes dishes. Terrence. He got out the back. She didn't follow. She just stood there, holding the fork. Lorna was awake, her hand on Willa's back. The slow turn is worse, she said, because it looks like them. It borrows their habits. At the clinic, we called it terminal patterning. Animals in the final stages repeat their most practiced behaviors. A horse will try to stand. A dog will circle before lying down. They're not choosing. The body is running a recording. So the singing, whoever's up there sang. In a choir, maybe, in the shower. It doesn't matter. The throat remembers what the person doesn't. That sentence has lived in me for 22 years. The throat remembers what the person doesn't. I checked my pack, adjusted the candles so they wouldn't break against the cans, tucked the matches deeper in the bag where moisture couldn't reach them. Take the Prosser Road route, Phelan said, drawing on the back of a church bulletin with a stubby pencil. Through here, Gilman, Dewar, Prosser. The vet clinic is on the right, past a yellow house with a collapsed porch. There's a feed store next to it. Might have grain, might have nothing. Past that, you're in open country for 2 miles before you hit Route 11 south. Route 11 is a highway. It'll be full of cars. Full of stopped cars, which means cover if you stay low. And the dead don't seem interested in empty vehicles. They want sound. They want movement. A stopped car is furniture to them. I memorized the route. Phelan didn't offer me the paper he was drawing it for Lorna, in case he didn't come back from his next supply run. Redundancy. A line cook who understood mise en place as a survival philosophy. At 5:15, the light through the high basement windows went amber, then gray, then gone. Dusk. Lorna caught my wrist as I passed her. Her grip was stronger than I expected. Your mother, she said. The candles. Was it just a feeling, or did she know something? With Lenore, there's no difference. Tell her if you get there. Tell her the vet tech says she's the only sane person in America. I looked at Willa and Amos, still pressed against their mother's sides. Amos had his thumb in his mouth. Willa was watching me with those recording eyes. I'll find the antibiotics, I said. Don't promise, Lorna said. Promises are debt. Just try. I climbed the stairs. Phelan walked me to the fire door and checked the alley. Clear. He handed me the church bulletin map, folded tight. I drew you a copy while you slept, he said. In case. I took it. I didn't thank him because we'd moved past the vocabulary of thanks into the vocabulary of necessity. I stepped into the November dark and walked south. The western route through Gilman and Dewar was quieter than the main road, but not empty. I learned to read the dead the way Lenore read weather by the small signs, the peripheral data. A curtain moving in a house with no wind. A gate swinging when no hand had touched it. The particular quality of silence that meant something was standing just around a corner, not moving, not hunting, just existing in the awful patience of a thing that doesn't need to eat or rest or plan. I saw 7 of them in the first mile. 3 standing in a cul-de-sac, facing different directions like broken compass needles. 2 in a driveway, one sitting on the ground with its legs straight out, the other leaning against a minivan with its forehead on the glass. 1 in a backyard, visible through a gap in the fence, walking a circuit around a bird bath with the mechanical regularity of a toy on a track. 1 on a porch, seated in a chair, hands on its knees, looking at the street with eyes that saw everything and understood nothing. I gave each of them wide berth. I breathed through my nose. I placed each foot with intent. Phelan's instruction, "Walk like you're not there," became my liturgy. The vet clinic on Prosser was exactly where he'd described it. A low cinder block building with a gravel lot and a sign that read Prosser Road Animal Care in faded green letters. The padlock on the front door was heavy but old, and the hasp it hung from was attached to wood, not steel. I used the back end of the Swiss Army knife's large blade as a pry and worked the screws out of the door frame in 4 minutes. Lenore had taught me this too, although in her context, the lesson was about replacing a rotten door frame at the house on Harker Road. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and animal fear, the second scent older. Baked into the linoleum, the residue of 1,000 nervous patients. I moved by flashlight, keeping the beam low, and pointed at the floor. The pharmacy cabinet was behind the reception desk, a standard glass front case with a slide lock. Amoxicillin, cephalexin, metronidazole, meloxicam for pain. I took all of it, stuffing bottles into my jacket pockets. I also took gauze, medical tape, a bottle of betadine, and a pair of surgical scissors. The clinic had a small refrigerator that was warm now, its contents spoiled. But on the counter beside it, I found a case of electrolyte packets designed for dehydrated calves. I took 6. On my way out, I passed the kennels. 4 cages, all open, all empty. Whoever had closed this clinic had let the animals go first. That detail lodged in me like a splinter. Outside, the dark was complete. No street lights, no porch lights, no headlights. The only illumination was a quarter moon, and the distant glow of something burning to the east, a structure fire, unattended, painting the low clouds the color of a healing bruise. I walked south on Prosser until it ended at a T-junction. Left was Greenvale. Right was open country. I turned right. The land between the suburban edge and Route 11 was farmland, harvested cornfields, stubble rows, bare earth smelling of frost and decomposition. The openness was both gift and threat. Nothing could hide in a harvested field, but nothing could hide me in a harvested field. I was a vertical line on a horizontal plane, visible from every direction to anything with functioning eyes. I walked faster. Not running was noise. Running was breath. Running was the sound that brought them. But faster, purpose faster. The walk of a man with 40 miles behind him in theory and 38 miles ahead in practice, and a mother at the end of the line who had never once in his life been wrong about the dark. At the edge of the first field, I found a gap in a hedgerow and stopped to rest. I drank water. I ate peanut butter from the jar with my fingers. I checked the antibiotics in my pockets and thought about Lorna and Phelan and Willa's ancient eyes, and the decision I'd already made without knowing I'd made it. I wasn't just walking to my mother. I was walking back. Route 11 was a graveyard of glass and steel. Cars stretched in both directions, bumper to bumper, doors open, belongings scattered on the median like the contents of a shattered piñata. Suitcases, garbage bags of clothing, a child's bicycle with pink streamers on the handlebars. The exodus had been total, and it had failed completely. People had driven toward something a rumored safe zone, a military cordon, the simple animal instinct that away was better than here and the road had swallowed them. I climbed between two SUVs and crouched on the median, listened. The wind moved through the open doors of the cars and made a sound like a cathedral breathing. Nothing else moved. I followed the median south, keeping low, using the vehicles as cover. It was slow work. Every gap between cars was a decision point: cross fast and risk noise, or crawl and risk time. I crossed fast and placed each step on the painted line, where fallen glass was least likely to accumulate. 4 miles down Route 11, I found a woman in a station wagon. She was alive. She was awake. She was sitting in the driver's seat with her seatbelt on and both hands on the wheel, and she was not moving. I saw her from the median, and I stopped. She saw me. Her eyes tracked me. She did not speak. I approached the car slowly, hands visible, making myself small and unthreatening, the posture of a man approaching a frightened animal. Another Lenore lesson, although Lenore's context had been a neighbor's dog that bit. "Ma'am," I said, barely above a whisper. Her lips moved. No sound. I came closer. Her face was drawn, eyes sunken, lips cracked. Dehydrated. Probably hadn't left the car since the road locked up. On the passenger seat beside her was a purse, a thermos, and a framed photograph of 2 teenage boys. "I'm Dove," I said. "I'm not going to hurt you. Have you been here since the power went out?" She nodded. "Can you walk?" She nodded again, but her hands didn't leave the wheel. "What's your name?" "Eunice," she said. Her voice was the ghost of a voice, barely enough air behind it to carry. "Eunice Talmadge." "Eunice, I have water." I passed her a bottle through the open window. She drank half of it in one sustained pull, then held the bottle against her chest like a rescued thing. "My boys are at Fort Milliken," she said. "National Guard. They told me to drive to the base. I drove and the road stopped and I couldn't go forward and I couldn't go back because behind me was... I know. I've been sitting here for 2 days. I keep my belt on because if I take it off, I'll open the door. And then I'll be out there. And I don't know what happens out there." "What happens out there is walking," I said. "That's all. You walk and you stay quiet, and you get somewhere that isn't here." Eunice Talmadge looked at me through the window of her station wagon, and I watched her make the decision. It took about 15 seconds. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt, picked up the photograph, left the purse, and got out of the car. She was small, maybe 5'3", wearing a church dress and flat shoes. Not the outfit for a walk through the end of the world. But she was standing. And standing was more than most people on this road would ever do again. "I'm going south," I said. "To my mother's house, past Calvary Hill. You're welcome to walk with me." "How far?" 34 miles from here. Maybe less if we find a working vehicle. 34 miles in church shoes. My mother would say the shoes are an excuse. She'd tell you to take them off and walk barefoot before she'd let you sit in a dead car. The faintest trace of a smile crossed Eunice's face. "Your mother sounds difficult." "My mother sounds alive." We walked. Eunice Talmadge was a retired school librarian from Dunmore, and she walked the way librarians do, everything steadily, without complaint, with a quiet internal catalog running at all times. She told me about her boys, Jasper and Hal, both guardsmen, both stationed at Fort Milliken, 40 miles north, a direction I was not going. She told me about her husband, Raymond, who had died of pancreatic cancer 4 years ago, and who she missed every day, but missed most on Tuesdays, which had been his cooking night. She told me these things in a low, even voice, calibrated to the radius of hearing that existed between us, and not 1 inch beyond. She was, I realized, good at this, good at the quiet, good at the measured step, good at the endurance of sustained discomfort without drama. She'd spent 40 years managing silence and difficult children and the steady, thankless work of keeping stories organized. She was equipped for the apocalypse in ways that had nothing to do with weapons or provisions. At mile 26, we left Route 11, where it curved east, and picked up a county road that ran south-southwest toward Calvary Hill. The land here was rolling, wooded, darker than the open farm country. The trees leaned over the road and made a tunnel of bare branches, their shadows tangling on the pavement like veins in an X-ray. We'd been walking for 5 hours. My feet hurt. Eunice's feet, in her church flats, must have been ruined, but she hadn't said a word. "Stop," she said. I stopped. Ahead of us, maybe 200 yards, a figure stood in the center of the road. Not swaying, not drifting, standing, arms at its sides, head up, facing us. We held still. 10 seconds, 20. "Is it?" Eunice started. "I don't know." The figure raised one hand. "The dead don't wave." I stepped forward. "Hello?" "Don't come closer," the figure said. A man's voice, hoarse but controlled. "Tell me who you are before I tell you what I am." "Do Velda. Walking south to Calvary Hill. This is Eunice. She's with me." A pause. "Are either of you bitten? Scratched? Fevered?" "No." "Will you show me your arms? Both sides?" Eunice and I rolled up our sleeves and held our arms out, palms up and down. The man walked toward us slowly, a flashlight clicking on from his hand. He ran the beam over our forearms, our necks, our faces, checking. "Sonderbrecher," he said. "I'm an apiarist. I keep bees. I have a workshop and a house about a mile west of here. You're welcome to it for the night if you'll help me move something heavy in the morning." "What kind of heavy?" "My hive boxes, 36 of them. I need to get them to higher ground before the temperature drops and the bees cluster. If the hives freeze, I lose them. If I lose them, I lose the only renewable food source within 20 miles. An apiarist. A beekeeper. In the middle of a zombie apocalypse, a man was trying to save his bees. Lenore would have loved him instantly. "Deal," I said. Sonderbrecher led us west on a gravel track to a property set back from the road. A small farmhouse, a larger workshop, and behind them, visible in the moonlight, row after row of white wooden hive boxes arranged on pallets like a library of insects. The house was warm. Sonder had a wood stove, a well with a hand pump, and a pantry stocked with honey, dried fruit, oats, and canned goods. His wife had died 3 years ago. His children were in Portland, unreachable. He'd been alone since the outbreak started, and he'd spent the time, characteristically, caring for something other than himself. "The dead don't bother the bees," he said, pouring us mugs of warm water from the stovetop kettle. "They walked through the apiary twice, knocked one box over, never attacked them. They don't react to the bees at all. No pain response, I think. The stingers go in and nothing happens." "No pain response," Eunice repeated softly. "They feel nothing. Not cold, not heat, not stings. Nothing that would make a living thing flinch." We sat at Sonder's kitchen table drinking warm water and eating oats with honey, and for the first time since the parking lot, I felt the clutch in my chest release by 1 degree. Not safety, not peace, but a pause, a breath between sentences. I thought about the candles in my pack and the candles in Lenore's basement and the distance between. and I thought about the shape of the world that was assembling itself around us. A world of beekeepers and librarians and line cooks, of competencies that had nothing to do with weapons, of people whose skills were in keeping things alive. I still had 14 miles to my mother. I'd walk them in the morning. We moved the hives at dawn. Sonder had scouted a ridge behind his property, 40 feet of elevation gain. A flat shelf of rock with southern exposure, sheltered from wind by a stand of old oaks. The dead, he'd observed, didn't climb well. Their coordination degraded on inclines. A path that a living person walked without thinking became, for them, an obstacle that slowed their drift to a crawl. 36 hive boxes, each weighing between 40 and 70 pounds, depending on the honey stores. Eunice couldn't carry the heavy ones, but she could carry the light ones. And she did, making trips up the slope in her ruined church shoes without a sound of complaint. Sonder and I shuttled the full boxes between us, 2 hands each side, the bees inside buzzing their confusion at the movement. It took 3 hours. By the end, my arms were shaking, and my lower back had declared independence from the rest of my body. But the hives were on the ridge, arranged in their rows, facing south, alive. Sonder stood at the top of the slope and looked at his bees, and I watched something cross his face that I recognized, the expression of a man who has saved the one thing he could save, knowing everything else is beyond reach. "Go," he said. "Find your mother. Bring her back here if she'll come." "She won't come. She'll have a plan. She always has a plan." "Then carry the plan back to me. I have honey and warmth and a ridge the dead can't climb. Tell her that." I left Eunice with Sonder. She didn't want to stay. She wanted to keep walking toward Fort Milliken and her boys, but her feet were blistered to meet, and Sonder's house was warm and had food and water. And the practical part of her, the librarian part, knew that walking on destroyed feet was not a plan, but a gesture. "I'll come back," I said. "Or I'll send word. Either way, you're not forgotten here." "I've been a librarian for 40 years, Eunice said. "I know how to wait. I also know how to be useful in a room full of scared people. You go find your mother and tell her Eunice Talmadge says the candles were the sanest things she ever heard of." I walked south. The last 14 miles to Calvary Hill were the longest miles of my life. Not because of distance, but because of anticipation. Every step was a step closer to knowing whether Lenore was alive. And every step was a step closer to learning I was wrong. And I was not ready for the second thing, but I could not stop walking toward it. The land rose gradually. Calvary Hill wasn't a hill in the dramatic sense. It was a long, gentle incline that lifted the road above the surrounding farmland and gave you a view, on clear days, of the valley to the west and the ridge to the east. Lenore had chosen the house on Harker Road for this view, although she would never have admitted to choosing a house for aesthetic reasons. She'd have said she chose it for the sight lines. I passed through the town of Calvary Hill proper, a post office, a general store, a gas station with a hand-painted sign, 4 churches. All dark, all still. I saw 2 of the dead in the parking lot of the Baptist church, standing side by side, facing the door, as if waiting for a service that would never begin. They didn't turn when I passed. They were attending to something I couldn't hear. Harker Road was a quarter-mile past the gas station, turning east off the county road and climbing through a corridor of maples that Lenore had planted the year she moved in. She'd planted them because she wanted shade in 20 years, and she'd gotten it. The maples were enormous now, their bare branches interlocking above the road like the ribs of a cathedral. At the end of the road, the house. Small, white clapboard, green shutters she painted every 3rd spring, a porch with 2 chairs and a side table. The garden, dormant now, mulched for winter. The woodpile, stacked with geometric precision against the south wall. And in every window, a candle burning. Every window, both floors, each one holding a single flame, steady in the still air, visible from the road like a constellation brought to earth. I stood at the foot of the driveway, and I did something I hadn't done since I was 11 years old, and fell out of the oak in the backyard and broke my arm. I cried, not dramatically, not with sound, just water running down my face, hot in the cold air, while I looked at my mother's house and its burning windows and understood that she was alive, and she was waiting, and she had lit the candles because the candles were not for light. They were a signal. They were a sentence. They said, "I am here. Come home." I walked up the driveway. The front door opened before I reached the porch. Lenore stood in the doorway wearing her brown cardigan and her indoor shoes and an expression that was not surprise, not relief, not any of the things a normal mother's face does when her son appears after the end of the world. Her expression was confirmation, as if I had arrived on schedule, as if the candles had been a summons and she'd been timing the flame. "You walked," she said. "The car was dead." "I know. Come in. I've made soup." The house was warm. The wood stove was lit. The kitchen table was set for 2. She'd set it for 2 every night, she told me later, since the power went out. Not hope. Certainty. She'd set 2 places because she knew I was coming. The way she'd known about the candles, the way she'd known about the dark. She served the soup, potato and leek, with dried herbs from her garden. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table with candles burning on the windowsill behind her and the fire snapping in the stove and the absolute silence of a world without electricity pressing against the walls. "Tell me what you saw," she said. I told her. All of it. The parking lot, Mrs. Kessler, Phelan and Lorna, and the children in the church, the vet clinic, Eunice on Route 11, Sonder and his bees, the singing in the sanctuary, the man on the highway with his throat open, the dead in the Baptist parking lot, waiting for church. Lenore listened the way she always listened, with her whole body still and her eyes on my face and her hands folded on the table. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react visibly. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The singing," she said finally. "The throat remembers." That's what Lorna said. Lorna is correct. The body holds what the mind releases. I've known this since I was 6 years old and watched my grandmother set the table every evening for a husband who had been dead for 20 years. Lenore got up, retrieved something from the counter, and set it on the table. A notebook, spiral-bound, college-ruled, filled from cover to cover in her small, precise handwriting. "I started writing when the radio went silent," she said. "Everything I know about surviving, not theory, practice, how to purify water, how to treat wounds with what you have, how to store food without refrigeration, how to read a room before you enter it, how to tell if someone is turned by the way they stand." How do you know how to tell if someone is turned? By the way they stand, David. The living lean, the dead balance. A living person shifts weight, favors a hip, tilts a shoulder. A dead person stands like a plumb line. No fidget, no compensation. The body forgets discomfort because discomfort requires a self to experience it. She said this the way she said everything, as fact, as observation, as something she'd tested against the world and found accurate. Lenore Velde did not speculate. She reported. "I'm going back," I said. "There are people along the route who need help." A woman with a broken ankle, 2 children, a man running supply routes alone. A beekeeper with a ridge the dead can't climb. A librarian who walked 34 miles in church shoes. Of course you're going back. Come with me. She looked at me across the candles with her creekstone eyes, and I saw in them the thing I always saw, the country that didn't exist anymore. The girl who survived it. The woman who'd spent 50 years preparing for a darkness she hoped would never come, and knew always would. I'll pack the candles, she said. We spent 2 days preparing. Lenore did not rush. Rushing, she said, was how you forgot the thing that killed you. She moved through her house with the focused efficiency of a woman dismantling a camp she'd inhabited for decades, selecting what mattered, discarding what didn't, reducing a life to what could be carried. The candles went first. Not all of them there were still hundreds in the basement, more than 2 people could transport. She chose the beeswax, 312 of them, wrapped in cloth and packed into the 2 largest totes. Beeswax burned longer, burned cleaner, and could be melted and recast. The paraffin was disposable. The soy was useful but secondary. Beeswax is money, she said. When there is no money, there is beeswax. She packed the notebook. She packed seeds, actual garden seeds, in labeled envelopes, stored in a metal box in the cellar. Tomato, bean, squash, carrot, lettuce, herbs. She'd been keeping seeds for 5 years, saving and drying them from each year's garden, rotating the stock. I'd thought it was a hobby. It was a contingency. She packed medical supplies from a kit I hadn't known she maintained. Antibiotics, human grade, purchased over the counter during a trip to Mexico 2 years ago. Suture kits, iodine, bandages. A field surgery manual published by the U.S. Army in 1943 that she'd found at a used bookstore and read cover to cover. Where did you learn all of this? I asked, not for the first time. From paying attention, Dubbit. The world teaches you everything you need if you don't look away. She packed food. Canned goods, dried beans, rice, oats, salt, sugar, powdered milk, honey from a local apiary she patronized. Enough for 2 weeks of meals for 4 people, portioned and labeled. She'd done this before the outbreak. She'd been ready. The question I hadn't asked hung between us like a held breath. How did you know? She was wrapping a jar of honey in a dish towel. She didn't look up. The bees, she said. The bees? Outbreak's bees, and others. The hives were failing for 6 months before the outbreak. Not colony collapse, something different. The bees were leaving, whole hives emptying overnight. I spoke to Sander at the farmer's market in September. He was frightened, not of losing the business, of the silence. He said the meadows were going quiet, and the quiet was spreading. You knew because the bees were leaving? I knew because the bees felt something the instruments couldn't measure. Animals leave before earthquakes. Birds go silent before storms. And bees are the most sensitive instrument the earth has. When the bees leave, something is coming that is worse than winter. She finished wrapping the honey and placed it in the tote. I bought the candles the next day. We loaded the supplies into a garden cart, a heavy-duty 2-wheeled cart she used for mulch and firewood. We'd pull it together, switching off, trading the handles when our arms gave out. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast. But it was Lenore's way. Thorough, practical, indifferent to aesthetics. On the morning of the 3rd day, Lenore locked her house, blew out the candles in every window, and left a note on the kitchen table. Lenore and Dovelde. Gone north to Outbreak's apiary, ridge west of Route 11 at County Road 7. We have food, medicine, and light. Follow the candles. Follow the candles, I said. I'll leave one burning at every turn in the road, she said. in a jar, sheltered from wind. Beeswax burns for hours. Anyone walking this road after us will see them. And so will the dead. The dead aren't looking for candles, David. They're looking for sound. A candle is silent. A candle is the quietest kind of hope. We pulled the cart down Harker Road beneath the bare maples, and at each turn, she stopped, placed a glass jar on a fence post or a mailbox or a flat stone, lit a beeswax taper inside it, and walked on. A trail of small flames marking the way north, marking the way toward people. I looked back once. The candles flickered behind us like a sentence written in fire, legible only to anyone still capable of reading. The walk north took 2.5 days. Longer than my walk south, because the cart was heavy and the road was debris-strewn. And we stopped. Lenore insisted on stopping at every building that might hold a living person. She knocked on doors. She called out low and careful, the way you'd call a cat that's hidden under a porch. She left, at each silent house, a single candle on the step and a note written on index cards she'd packed for this purpose. Survivors North. Follow the candles. Sonder Brecka's Ridge, west of Route 11 at County Road 7. Food, water, shelter. You are not alone. That's the most important sentence, she said. Not the directions. The last one. You are not alone. Mom, we're advertising our location. We're advertising our existence. There's a difference. The dead know where we are. They can hear the cartwheels. The living need to know where we're going. I didn't argue. You didn't argue with Lenore about things she'd already decided. And you especially didn't argue with Lenore about how to treat frightened people. Lenore had been a frightened person once in a country that no longer existed. And the thing she remembered most was not the fear, but the silence. The silence of neighbors who didn't knock. The silence of officials who didn't answer. The silence that said, you are alone, and your aloneness is permanent, and no one is coming. The candles were her answer to that silence. Had always been. On the first night, we sheltered in an abandoned feed store, sleeping behind the counter with the cart wedged against the door. On the second night, we slept in a church, not the Methodist on Oxbow, but a Lutheran on Farrier Road, its basement dry and cold and empty. Lenore lit 4 candles and set them in the corners of the room, and the space became, for a few hours, a room instead of a bunker. On the morning of the 3rd day, we reached the Prosser Road junction and turned west toward Saunders' property. Phelan met us at the gravel track. He was thinner. His chef's coat was gone, replaced by a flannel shirt too large for him, probably Saunders. He carried a hatchet instead of the bat, but his eyes were the same, alert, assessing, running prep lists behind the calm. Eunice told me you'd come back, he said. I told her you might not. She said a man who walks 40 miles to his mother walks 40 miles back. Eunice is a good judge of character, Lenore said. I'd like to meet her. Phelan looked at my mother, this small, silver-haired woman, pulling a garden cart full of candles and seeds and a field surgery manual from 1943. And I watched something shift in his face. Not relief. Recognition. He knew what she was. He'd seen it in the people who walked into the Devereaux kitchen and understood the room without being told. She's on the ridge, he said, with Sonder and Lorna and the children. Lorna's here. Carried her. 3 nights ago. The church was getting attention. Something about the building drew them. The high walls, the echoes. Sound bounced around in there like a bell. We moved everyone to the ridge. The ridge was transformed. Saunders' hive boxes stood in their rows, the bees drowsy but alive in the cold. Beside them, a camp was taking shape. A tarp strung between oaks, a fire pit ringed with stones, water hauled from Saunders' well. Lorna was sitting on a canvas chair with her splinted leg extended, directing Eunice in the construction of a lean-to with the calm authority of a woman who'd managed a veterinary operating room. Willa and Amos were stacking firewood. Amos had a bruise on his forehead. Willa still had those ancient eyes, but her hands were busy, and busy hands are different from still hands in a way that Lenore would have understood immediately. 7, Lenore said, counting. 8 now, Phelan said. A man came through yesterday. Found one of your candles on Farrier Road. Followed them here. A man I hadn't met stepped out from behind the tarp lean-to. Tall, gaunt, wearing wire-rimmed glasses repaired with electrical tape. He extended his hand. Gideon Auld, he said, high school biology teacher. I thought I was imagining the candles. Then I thought it was a trap. Then I decided a trap with beeswax candles was the strangest trap I'd ever heard of, so I followed. 8 people on a ridge. It wasn't a settlement. It wasn't a plan. It was an accumulation of accidents and decisions, and the stubborn refusal of 8 people to sit in the dark alone. Lenore looked at the ridge the way she looked at a garden plot in March, seeing not what was there, but what could be planted. The bees are the center. She told Sander that first evening, sitting by the fire with the hive boxes humming behind them. Honey is food, medicine, trade goods, and morale. Protect the bees, and everything else can be rebuilt around them. I've been telling myself that for weeks, Saunders said, but it sounds insane. The world has ended, and I'm worried about varroa mites. The world hasn't ended. The lights went out. Those are different things. Lenore organized us without appearing to organize us. She didn't give orders. She asked questions. What do we know how to do? Phelan could cook and ration. Lorna could treat injuries and new animal husbandry. Eunice could teach, manage information, and calm frightened children. Sonder knew bees, agriculture, and the land. Gideon knew biology, chemistry, and how to explain things to people who didn't understand them. I knew, what did I know? Editing, grammar, the precise arrangement of sentences. You know how to carry a message, Lenore said. That's what you've been doing. You walked to me, and you walked back, and you carried people with you. That's the skill. That's not a skill. That's just walking. Walking towards someone is the hardest skill there is, David. Most people walk away. We built the camp over the following days. Gideon and I felled dead trees for firewood and shelter poles. Phelan organized the food stores and established a rationing system based on caloric need, a saziren. Lorna and the children ate first, because injury and growth demanded it. Sonder maintained the hives and began planning for spring pollination. Eunice cataloged our supplies in a ledger she'd made from the back pages of hymnals. Lorna directed construction from her chair, her ankles slowly healing under a regimen of antibiotics and elevation, and Lenore tended the candles. Every evening, as the dark came down, she walked the perimeter of the ridge and placed lit candles in jars along the edge. Not for warmth, not for defense. The dead avoided the ridge, the incline defeated them, their coordination failing on the slope, and they'd given up approaching after the first week. The candles were for anyone walking the road below, anyone looking up in the dark and seeing, on the ridge, a line of small flames. If even one person follows them, she said, the candles did their work. They did their work. Over the next 3 weeks, 11 more people found the ridge. A family of 4, Collis and Nadia Strand, and their twin daughters, Petra and Marin, who'd been hiding in a barn for 9 days. A man named Uriel Foss, who'd walked from the coast with nothing but a water bottle and a photograph of his mother. A former postal worker, Bethune Crawley, who arrived with a canvas mailbag full of prescription medications she'd salvaged from a pharmacy. A young couple, Oswin and Ro Garrity, Ro 7 months pregnant, who'd followed the candles from the Route 11 junction and arrived at the base of the ridge at 3 in the morning. 19 people, on a ridge, with bees. Lenore looked at the camp, and I could see the arithmetic working behind her eyes, the same arithmetic I'd seen on Phelan's face in the church. The same arithmetic in Saunders' voice when he counted hive boxes. Not the arithmetic of subtraction, how many can we lose and still survive, but the arithmetic of sufficiency. What do 19 people need to last until spring? And what do they need to become something that lasts longer than spring? We need more candles, she said. We have 200. 200 keeps us lit for months. We need enough to keep a road lit for years. Mom, the candles aren't for us, David. They were never for us. They're for the ones who haven't found us yet. That was when I finally understood what my mother had been doing. Not stockpiling, not hoarding, not preparing for her own survival. She'd been building a signal fire, a long, quiet, patient signal fire, made of beeswax and intention, placed in her son's closet and on fence posts and in church doorways and along the edges of a ridge, saying the only thing worth saying in a world gone dark. Come here. You are not alone. There is light where people are. Winter fell and we survived it, not easily, not without cost. Bethune-Crawley's medications ran out in January, and the seizure condition she'd managed for 12 years came back with a cruelty that made me understand, in a way I hadn't before, that the dead were not the only enemy. The living body is its own adversary, always has been, and an apocalypse doesn't pause for epilepsy. Lorna treated her with what we had. Gideon improvised a ketogenic diet from Saunders' honey and the dried stores in the pantry, based on a medical protocol he vaguely remembered from a textbook. It helped. Not enough, but enough. Phelan kept us fed. The man was an artist of scarcity, turning monotonous ingredients into meals that tasted, if not good, at least like someone cared. He seasoned with dried herbs from Lenore's garden packets, and honey from the hives, and salt we scraped from a curing block Sonder kept in his workshop. He fed 19 people twice a day from a kitchen built of scavenged materials over an open fire. And he did it with the same focused intensity he'd brought to the Devereaux's line, the same refusal to send out a plate he wasn't satisfied with. Even if the plate was a tin cup of grain porridge. Willa spoke in February. She'd been silent for 3 months. Lorna didn't push. Eunice didn't push. Even Amos, who talked to his sister constantly in a one-sided monologue of 7-year-old observations, didn't ask her to answer. What Willa said, the first word she'd spoken since October, was this: the candles look like the city used to. She was standing on the ridge at dusk, watching Lenore place the evening jars. The flames below us, 20-30 candles on the slopes and fence posts and road markers, flickered in the failing light like a scattered constellation. And Willa, who had watched her old life go dark in a single night, saw in them something that looked like what she'd lost. Lenore knelt beside her and placed a candle in the girl's hands. Would you like to light one? Willa took the match, struck it on the box, lit the wick. Put it where someone will see it, Lenore said. Willa walked to the edge of the ridge and placed the jar on a flat rock, facing the road. She stood there for a long time, watching the flame. Amos came up beside her. Can I do one? Ask Mrs. Velde, Willa said. It was the most ordinary exchange in the world. A sister telling a brother to ask permission. But Lorna was crying, silently, in her canvas chair, and Eunice was looking away, and Phelan had stopped stirring the pot. And I understood that what we'd just witnessed was not a child speaking, but a child returning. The way a pilot light returns when you hold the match long enough. Spring came. The bees flew. Saunders' hives produced the first honey of the new world. And he wept when he pulled the frames, standing alone in the apiary with his veil down and his smoker cold, holding a frame of golden comb like a man holding a letter from someone he thought was dead. Lenore planted the garden. Every seed she'd packed, every envelope she'd labeled in her careful hand, went into the ground on the south-facing slope below the ridge. She planted by the calendar she kept in her notebook. A calendar of moon phases and frost dates and soil temperatures, maintained with the same precision she'd used to track blackout schedules in a country that no longer existed. The seeds grew. By May, we had lettuce, radishes, spinach. By June, tomato plants climbing stakes Gideon built from saplings. By July, beans hanging heavy on their poles and squash spreading across the slope in a green tide. People kept coming. The candles brought them. Lenore's notes brought them. Word of mouth brought them. Passed between survivors on the roads the way stories pass between travelers, incomplete, distorted, but carrying the essential truth. There is a ridge, and there are people on it, and there is light. By the end of that first year, we were 43. By the end of the second, 71. Lenore never called it a settlement. She called it a house. A house is where you light a candle and someone comes home to it, she said. That's all a house is. She was right. She was always right. Not because she saw the future, but because she understood the past, understood that darkness is the oldest emergency, and light is the oldest answer. And the distance between them is exactly the length of a human hand holding a match. She died on a Tuesday, not from the dead, not from violence or sickness or privation. From time. Lenore Velde was 81 years old, and she died in her sleep in the house Sonder built her on the ridge, in a room with 4 beeswax candles burning on the windowsill. I was sitting beside her. Willa, who was 22 by then, and carried a notebook of her own, was sitting beside me. I didn't set out candles that night. Phelan did. He walked the perimeter the way Lenore had walked it, placing jars, lighting wicks, his hands moving with the same careful precision he brought to everything, the precision of a man who knows that the quality of the gesture is the gesture. In the morning, I found her notebook on the table beside her bed. The last entry, dated the previous afternoon, read, "Dove will forget to light the east slope, remind Phelan. The road from the south is the dark one, and the dark road is where the lost ones walk." She was right. I had forgotten the east slope. There are 1,100 people on this ridge now. 1,100 people who followed candles placed by a woman who grew up in a country that no longer exists and who understood, before anyone else, that the lights would go out. And the only answer was to become the light yourself. Not a bonfire, not a flare. A candle. Small, quiet, inexhaustible in principle, if not in wax. I light them every evening. I light them because my mother asked me to, and because I'm her son, and because the dark road is still the dark road, and someone is always walking it.